London is the landscape of my imagination. It's the place to which I belong, it's the place in which I've always lived and in which I will die. It's the place of my hopes, of my dreams, of my ambitions, of my expectations. It's the setting and source of everything I've done. My name is Peter Ackroyd, and I am a writer. Today, we are witnessing the largest renaissance in the architecture of London since the middle of the 17th century. It is my belief that London has always been a city built upon the imperatives of power and of money. And as London moves into the 21st century, its skyline will continue to be shaped by private investment and development. The result will be a London of glittering spires and cones, of pinnacles and pyramids. And any attempt to constrain or control this future is doomed to failure. London is a city founded on water. The Thames is the reason London exists. The presence of London is reflected in the river. Reflected in an obvious way because, of course, it does actually reflect London's buildings, but also in a more potent way, as a symbol of time and eternity. The river has always been the setting for the monumental and the grand. All the great buildings of London can be seen from the river or are actually built beside the river. All of the 4 World Heritage Sites are along the Thames, for example. For some decades now, the river appears to have lost its traditional role as the focal point of London life. But now there is an attempt to reopen the Thames, to make it once again the silver river of Edmund Spenser and Alexander Pope. There are, I believe, 40 or 50 plans for huge redevelopment along the river. And it will make a great difference to London if the Thames again becomes central to its life and to the life of its people. We should never forget that London is essentially a city of people, not just a city of buildings. We have to get to know the human beings who are affected day by day by the spectacle of this barbaric splendor. They are the ones who understand it best because they understand it instinctively. They have to live beside it. They're not theorists, they're not architects, but they are citizens. And the voice of the citizen should always be heard.
I'm Gordon Dickens, and I'm Harbour Master with the Port of London Authority. I've been with them for over 30 years now. You don't see the city from within the city because it's a canyon. You've got high-rise buildings either side of it, and you can't see the layout, if you like. But of course, if you stand back on the river, you can see a lot more of how the whole thing builds upon itself. You've got a natural blending of old architecture and new architecture, and the whole thing has blended in very well. This is the colour of the Thames, I'm afraid. And other people would say it's dirty. It's not dirty, it's silty. The colour that you're seeing it's really suspended mud, it's suspended silt. And it does actually change quite a lot. And in fact, you can get a situation in certain conditions of tide where one side of the river is a different colour to the other side of the river. And I don't think I've ever seen it blue. The message we used to have when we were in the enclosed docks was if you fall in, the first thing that'll happen is that you will have your stomach pumped out, regardless of whether you swallowed any water or not. How do you go, Paul? Go on. All right. So we're just coming up to Cannon Street Railway Bridge now. And this rather large hall here used to be an office block, and this is indicative of the sort of work that's going on all the time along the banks of the Thames. Big holes appear, big buildings reappear in their places.
London continually replicates itself. Its limbs are regularly destroyed, but more glorious ones grow in their place. The roots of the demolished buildings germinate in the earth, infusing the new with their energy. Their buried life is restored. So there is a kind of continuity of spirit on the same site over hundreds of years. The Lloyd's building is a good example of this process. The modern building is built on the site of the old one, and that near the site of an older one still. Inspired by private wealth and personal ambition, the present Lloyd's building transformed urban architecture and introduced the vista of high technology into the city. But not everything of the old was lost. Physical relics of the old Lloyd's building can still be seen within the new.
Interesting there, that's the main entrance of the 1928 building, which is being preserved and which still stands at one of the entrances to this current building.
My name's Martin Leach, and I worked at Lloyd's for many years in the media relations department and public relations generally.
This is the centre of the 1928 underwriting room. The important thing here is the rostrum, which is situated in the present underwriting room and stands more or less on the same spot as it did geographically in the 1928 building.
The interesting thing about a lot of the commerce in the City of London is that the big markets grew from very modest beginnings. Lloyd's, for example, came from a 17th century coffee house. And what happened in the coffee shop was that the people who were customers in the coffee shop insured each other's ships. So it wasn't Mr. Lloyd who did it, it was the customers in the coffee shop. And Mr. Lloyd provided the premises and he sold coffee to them and provided facilities for them and so on.
At home, the Queen has been opening London's most striking new building. The building, which is already in use, cost £163 million. Its architect, Richard Rogers, watched the Queen declare it.
We moved into the building in May 1986, so we've been here 21 years now. The process of developing the design, planning permission and so on, and building the building took nearly 10 years, so from the very first concept. The actual construction was 8 years. And it's quite interesting to reflect that the design of the building, the concept, is actually 30 years old this year, so it is quite an old modern building in many ways, but it still looks very modern, very futuristic, and it works extremely well for the purpose in which it was, for which it was designed.
The Lloyd's building is one of the most important modern buildings in London because, in a way, it changed the perception of the urban office block. It made office life seem interesting and even exciting to those who played no part in it. Funnily enough, it opened in 1986, and that was the year that the city was transformed by something known as the Big Bang, which ended all the restrictive practices in the city. And in a sense, the Lloyd's building was the architectural equivalent of the Big Bang. It removed all the restrictive practices of what had then been urban, high-rise office blocks. This defining building of London's modern skyline was not the result of local authority planning, but the haphazard operation of commercial market forces.
The building was designed and became public at a time when there was a lot of discussion and controversy about modern architecture in general. I remember the chairman of Lloyd's being asked at a press conference soon after we moved in why an apparently stuffy 17th century marketplace like Lloyd's would go for a design of this type. So he said, well, if Lloyd's can't take a risk, then who can? There are nicknames for the building as a whole, some of which are repeatable and some of which aren't, but it is known as the oil refinery or the gas plant or the inside-out building. Somebody said that it had taken Lloyd's 300 years to go from a coffee shop to a coffee machine.
The buildings of London acquire affectionate nicknames as if by some communal instinct. In some cases, the nicknames have preceded the buildings themselves. A new office block proposed by Will Alsop has already been called the Doodle because of the bright artwork on its sides. Also planned are the cheese grater. Built on stilts, it will have glass lifts on the outside. The walkie-talkie. Plans for this include a sky garden at the top of the building. The helter-skelter, so called because it is in the form of a gigantic glass spiral. And most recently announced the Sugar Cube, an extension of the Tate Modern on the South Bank. These new buildings will join a menagerie of familiar pet-named friends. The London Eye, Ken's Testicle, and of course, the Gherkin.
The biggest gherkin in Christendom could soon be overshadowing London. The committee responsible for planning in London's financial district today gave permission for developers to go ahead.
Strange sights over the centuries, but not many to match the gherkin.
The building would be another adornment or excrescence on the face of London.
It's the latest unmistakable addition to the city's skyline.
Once tall buildings were thought of as monstrous and brutal, built as they were with private capital and dedicated to the making of money. The Gherkin, more properly known as the Swiss rebuilding, has changed all that. It has made tall buildings the object of wonder and amusement, and it has allowed ordinary Londoners to comprehend the City of London's current preeminence as a financial centre.
Because of the Gherkin, I'm suddenly aware of the city. It's become real to me, not just a place full of banks and insurers. I'm Deborah Singmaster, and I'm a freelance architectural journalist. I live in Clapham, and as soon as I start going east for a few minutes, there's the Gherkin. I'm already connected with the centre of London. It's changed our sort of mental map of London. Before, everybody thought about the West End, and the West End was the centre. Certainly for me, the West End was where I would go. And even friends who don't really like the building, and there are some, they also think that this is an extraordinary feature of the Gherkin.
After the Gherkin, tall is not necessarily a synonym for ugly, as it used to be in London terms. Architecture can be inventive now for the general public. It can flow like water, it can glide, it can eddy, it can create strange shapes, it can be whimsical, it can be comic.
The Gherkin plays visual tricks, its volume plays visual tricks, because as you go closer to it, it starts to almost vanish. You see already that although it's a monumental from far away, here it's starting to diminish. The top is already curved in, you'll never see the top. And there's nothing to really focus your attention on. There's an entrance, but it's a very low-key entrance. There's no great stairs, there are no sort of columns to the side, or there's no atrium. It's almost a column plonked in the ground. You don't even see the interior of the offices at all. I think there are wonderful surprises for those who are lucky enough to get in. They get up to paradise on the top floor, but we groundlings can just enjoy it, at this level.
The nicknames given to London's buildings point to the character of its architecture as a whole. It is theatrical, it is unsubtle, it is heterogeneous. Some say that the result is an incoherent mess and needs to be controlled.
I think, well, what is driving the process? I think the usual rather childish macho desires of architects to a great extent are combined with the same similar masculine desires by firms. At the moment, we just seem to have a rather absurd over-enthusiasm for building as many towers as possible.
You come to see the old London, not the new high-rise office blocks. And if they build some more office blocks, it's going to be ruined, absolutely ruined.
But this is to misunderstand the aesthetic of London. London is, in a way, an ugly city. But ugliness can be interesting. Ugliness, when it's in its natural context, has its own beauty. It's the beauty of appropriateness, if you like. And this ugly beauty is a product of the way London has evolved. Throughout its history, London's development has been unplanned and unpredictable. It has never followed a theory or an idea. It has never been driven by a coherent philosophy. It has simply grown in an organic and piecemeal fashion, opportunistic, haphazard, and market-led. As Sir Christopher Wren, the creator of St Paul's Cathedral, discovered, London simply refuses to submit itself to theoretical urban planning. Despite the general devastation of the Great Fire, Wren's plans to rebuild London along geometric lines came to nothing. The lesson of history is clear. People don't shape London. It's the other way around. London does not belong to the people belong to London. But in the past few years, the idea of centralized planning has once again emerged, with a particular focus on the East.
What are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to achieve the regeneration of an area whose potential has yet to be truly fulfilled. We're trying to make sure that we provide the homes that we need.
And our commitment, therefore, stretches to the City of London, to the South End and Sheerness. It's regeneration on a European scale. It's the biggest individual...
Yes, we do. We've got lots more homes, and we've got sites which are polluted, or old industrial sites we're ready and happy to build on. Yes, sir.
The government and the Mayor of London have ambitions to transform the entire East End of London, in particular to make it a decent home for the city's new immigrants. This is nothing new, of course. The East End has always been a place of immigration.
This area here is the East End of London. My grandparents came over from Eastern Europe under persecution, and they settled in this area close by here. My name is Philip Brown. I've been a licensed London taxi driver for over 28 years. This is my great-grandfather, who never came to this country. On the back of the card is Hebrew script, which I've got to define and work out exactly what that means. Next is my grandfather and my grandmother, who lived very close by, and that's holding me as a baby. And next is my father in uniform, and there he is as a handsome young man. Many say that he looks a little like me. I was very proud of him. There were 2 stop-off points for the immigrants coming from Europe, particularly the Jewish immigrants, who stopped here first and thought they'd found America. The ones that actually went on the boats said you've got off at the wrong place. Literally, they were sending them cablegrams to tell them that. But many of them now had settled here. So families were broken, some in England and some in America, had originally come from Eastern Europe. Even myself, I have some family in America. I would have kicked a football just across here on this green here. The trees weren't so big then. Remember, it was a long time ago. They were only seedlings. They've grown.
Now, the East End of London is historically the bad relation, the poor relation of the city. It was the area of smoke and smell and dirt. It was the area of poverty, the area of crime. It was the area everyone wanted to get away from.
People got out of the East End, and a lot of my brothers and sisters moved to the east, to Gants Hill and Ilford. So I was the only one out of my family who actually took the Northwest Passage. We're just coming up Brick Lane. Brick Lane, an area synonymous with the immigrant community, formerly Jewish area, and this is a changing environment here. This is the Bangladesh community now in this area.
The Mayor's plans are laudable. Investment in the East End is an attempt to end an historic anomaly, whereby successive generations of immigrants have moved steadily out to escape the stench and squalor of the East. The East End has had a bad deal for over 400 years. Now there is a chance to balance the account. I wish them well, but I doubt if they will have much effect in the long run. London is a dark city, dealing in power and exploitation. It will never change its nature. It is also the city of money. From its earliest foundation, it has been a giant market. That is why its major developments will be the work of money men and speculators. But now a greater authority than the Mayor of London is seeking to impose its will on the city.
Now, some of Britain's most famous landmarks could be placed on the United Nations in danger list because they're disappearing from the skyline. Conservation experts fear many
skyline for 900 years, but the Tower of London is under pressure to maintain its profile alongside new buildings.
A certain building, historic building, against the skyline or in relation to other historic buildings in the vicinity, then it loses the value.
The prospect of 21st century skyscrapers obscuring London's World Heritage sites has infuriated many observers and experts. Their attempt to rein in the development of London is not new. Throughout London's history, there has always been criticism of the modern in favour of the traditional, sometimes from the most exalted quarters.
Prince Charles last night renewed his attack on architects and the planning system, which had resulted, he said, in the wrecking of the skyline of London. Prince Charles told a corporation
You have,
of
ladies and
London
gentlemen, to give this much to the Luftwaffe. When it knocked down our buildings, it didn't replace them with anything more offensive than rubble. We did that. Not only did they wreck the London skyline in general, they also did their best to lose the Great Dome in a jostling scrum of office buildings, so mediocre that the only way you ever remember them is by the frustration they induce, like a basketball team standing shoulder to shoulder between you and the Mona Lisa.
Today, the focus of the anger of the conservationists is the Shard, a building that will be bigger and bolder than any before in London. The London Bridge Tower, to give it its proper name, will reach a height of more than 1,000 feet, which is nearly 250 feet higher than the Canary Wharf Tower. It will have the highest viewing gallery and the highest private apartments in Europe. Critics fear that in dwarfing Tower Bridge and the Tower of London, the Shard will somehow dilute the spirit of London. But for me, the Shard is a perfect embodiment of that spirit. It is wholly in keeping with the great London tradition of boastful and monumental architecture, a tradition driven by power and money.
It's already an iconic image, and it's not even built. My name is Richard Sace. I'm a model maker, and one of the buildings we have recently completed is the Shard. It's going to stand out. I'm a big fan of new and old. I think it's very important for the present generation to make its mark on London, as previous generations have done. London never stands still. People who will want to see the architecture
I think rather naively just sort of blend in with some of the previous designs, but you can never recapture what's gone before.
The buildings currently being constructed in London all say, "Look at me, I'm the best, I'm the greatest," in one form or another. And buildings are now going up so quickly that London has become a playground for the imagination of architects and developers.
You feel very grateful, and you feel you are part of something that, a city that has no equal in terms of its heritage, and also with buildings like this, its future. I mean, they're bold plans. 10, 15, 20 years ago, a proposal like this probably would have got absolutely nowhere. But now I think, as I say, that vision is attracting architects from around the world.
The last time the city saw building on this scale was after the Second World War, but that was a different kind of activity. That was the restoration of London. Now we're witnessing the celebration of London.
A lot of people that would have worked on the buildings in the past, you know, St Paul's, etc., you know, wouldn't have seen it finished. I always would have thought that would have been incredibly frustrating when the big cathedrals of the world went up. You'd start laying the foundations, but you'd never see it finished. But fingers crossed, we all will. Now, am I the right way around, do you think? I can't decide. I think for anyone of our generation to start on a building they didn't think they'd see complete, they probably wouldn't bother starting. I know I wouldn't.
We know for a fact that London has never been thought through, it's never been designed, it's never been planned. But there's something about the territory, something about the spirit, something about the presence of London which makes everything seem of a piece. It's the most extraordinary aspect of this city that despite its provisional and arbitrary nature, everything becomes part of it. Everything coheres. And that's my theory about the spirit of place, the territorial imperative. That somehow the territory, the earth, creates the life above it or influences the life above it. You might say the past and present coexist, but I think it's more than that. I think the past and the present are entwined like lovers in an embrace. So the memory of the past is very much present in the development of the future. And in a sense, the future of London is already here. We should embrace it.
If you'd like to have your say on London's changing skyline, BBC London 94.9 in partnership with Reba is holding a debate this Thursday. If you'd like to take part, log on to the BBC London website at bbc.co.uk/London.